Good morning, everyone. Diversity is not about how we differ. It's about embracing one another's uniqueness, as our strength lies not in our similarities, but in our differences. On this note, I, Nandita Kaushal, on behalf of OP Jindal Global University, re- welcome you all to the seminar on Diversity, Inclusion, and Internationalization, Comparative Perspectives. We will first begin with our inaugural session on reimagining diversity and inclusion for the 21st century university. May I now invite Professor Dr. C. Rajkumar, Founding Vice Chancellor, OP Jindal Global University, and Director, International Institute for Higher Education, Research and Capacity Building, to deliver the welcome address.
Thank you, Nandita. A very good morning to all of you. First of all, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you to this facility, which is, of course, not new, but there are some events and initiatives that were promoted in this Delhi-based facility, and I am very delighted that we're hosting this seminar today at this facility here. Let me take this opportunity to really extend a warm welcome to our very distinguished guests who are present on this occasion. It's a very special occasion for us. This is part of our effort to celebrate the 10th anniversary of our university. As you know, OP Jindal Global University was founded through a philanthropic initiative of our founding benefactor, Mr. Naveen Jindal, on 30th September 2009. And as we celebrate our 10th anniversary on 30th September 2019, we have used this entire year to essentially mark several milestones, but also track the journey of evolution of OP Jindal Global University. Ajay, can I ask you to come and sit in the front row, please? Please occupy the first seats. It's also an occasion for us to recognize the journey of OP Jindal Global University in these 10 years. As those of you who are familiar with this journey and those who may not be familiar with this journey, we've started in a very modest manner with only 10 faculty members and 100 students and one school in the year 2009. And today we have evolved into a multidisciplinary university with 8 different schools in law, business, international affairs, public policy, liberal arts, journalism, architecture, and banking and finance. We have significantly expanded our student body from, say, 100 students to over 4,400 students. We have even more significantly expanded our faculty from, say, 10 faculty members to over 440 full-time faculty members. This journey has been quite inspiring for all of us who have been part of this journey, and I'm very happy to report that more than half of the faculty members who were the 10 who joined on the first year continue to be with us and are making significant contributions even today. Let me also recognize the fact that this journey has been possible due to a number of individuals and institutions who have inspired us in this journey. And I'm very, very grateful and indeed fortunate to introduce the chief guest for this morning's inaugural session, Professor Dr. Virendra Chauhan, Chairman of the National Assessment and Accreditation Council, former chairperson of the University Grants Commission, and also a very distinguished scientist, a biotechnologist, and somebody who has worked and thought through issues relating to higher education, including regulation, policy, and governance of universities in India for a very long time. Professor Chauhan was a Rhodes Scholar at the University of Oxford, and for a very long time, several decades, he was heading the Rhodes Scholarship Selection Committee. And over 20 years ago, I was myself the recipient of the Rhodes Scholarship, and he sat in my selection committee. Beyond that, I think it is only fair to say that Professor Chauhan has been the vanguard of fundamental reforms in higher education, including challenging the status quo of Indian universities and how to make universities more imaginative and to engage in path-breaking reforms that can remove the Indian higher education institutions and universities from the clutches of mediocre regulation as well as interventions from the government. These set of reforms that Professor Chauhan led as member and later chairperson of UGC and currently chairperson of NAC are salutary contributions in the field of higher education, and it is only fair to say that India owes a debt of intellectual gratitude to Professor Chauhan for his leadership and his far-sighted vision that has culminated in these reforms in relation to higher education. Today is a very special day, as I mentioned. We are releasing a very important report. The title of the report is Diversity and Inclusion Towards Building a Diverse, Equitable and Global University. This report is a culmination of a journey that O.P. Jindal Global University has undertaken in the last decade. And from its early origins, the university has been deeply committed to the vision of building a diverse and equitable and a global university. This journey is a continuing journey. A number of issues remain to be addressed, and diversity is a path that every institution needs to undertake, and it is part of our commitment towards building excellence within institution building. I am also grateful to a number of individuals, and in particular, Ms. Princey George. As you know, Princey heads the Office of Strategic Initiatives and Institutional Research. She is the lead author of the report and has worked together with a good team of committed individuals to produce this report in a relatively short span of time, but also engaged with our faculty members, our deans of schools, heads of departments, and in many ways tracking both the data and the institutional imagination that has resulted in the publishing of this report. I am grateful to Princey for her leadership and for our steadfast commitment to the idea of diversity that is central to the notion of institution building. In fact, it is only fair to say that our country is one of the most pluralistic societies anywhere in the world. There is something to be said about the idea of pluralism that is deeply embedded in both in our constitutional values and our institutional imagination. Pluralism and diversity is so deeply embedded that quite often people talk about India and they ask a question, particularly those who are not from India: what unites India as a country? What is that single important characteristic that binds us as a nation? What is that single feature, that unique characteristic that is pretty much connects the entire country from Kashmir to Kanyakumari? And whenever I've asked that question when I travel abroad, I've thought through that question quite deeply, and sometimes I think in terms of, is there a religion that unites all of us? Is there a particular set of caste or caste systems that unite us? Is there a particular set of language or languages that unite us as a country? Are there festivals or folklore or clothing habits, culinary habits? Or is there anything that simply unites India as a nation? And while I made that remark on a lighter vein when I said that if I have to think so deeply that what unites India in terms of its unique pluralistic characteristics all the way from Nagaland to Kanyakumari, I could only think of cricket. Probably that's one of those things which actually captures Indian imagination, because the uniqueness of this country is its extraordinary pluralistic engagement. In fact, I often say that my wife, who's a Punjabi Jain, we don't speak our language is different, our cultures are different. In fact, the Hindus of North India pray to completely different gods, with which most people in South India have no connection whatsoever. And even the names of gods are different, let alone the ways you worship that god. So that is something which is so unique about the Indian pluralism. In fact, it is a tall order for universities, let alone other organizations, to capture that extraordinary diversity that is so deeply embedded in our nation's philosophy and our rich civilizational heritage. The Constitution of India attempted to address this element of diversity, and in many of its provisions, both in the fundamental rights as well as the directive principles of state policy, had embedded the notions of diversity. In fact, many provisions that created separate frameworks of autonomy and governance, all the way from Article 370 for the state of Jammu and Kashmir, but also many parts of Northeast, even other parts of India and other states. Autonomous frameworks and evolutionary autonomous frameworks were created with the view to respect that diversity, the pluralism that is so central to India's imagination. So in some ways, the objective of this report is to capture part of that imagination, to recognize that diversity and inclusion are so central to the idea of a university, while being conscious of the fact that all aspects of diversity may at times come in conflict with what a university attempts to achieve. Universities are indeed in the pursuit of excellence. And on top of it, if internationalization and globalization are important challenges that are posing Indian universities and universities around the world, to what extent that pursuit of creating a global university potentially comes in conflict with ideas of diversity, and how inclusion and accommodation and the notions of pluralism are brought into the vision of building an equitable university. So in some ways, this report is a call to Indian higher education system. It's a call to Indian universities. It's a call for universities around the world that we need to move towards appreciating the larger context of society, and to what extent we in universities have to address the issues of diversity as a central characteristic of institution building. Of course, the Indian context has thrown open issues relating to affirmative action, as well as quotas and reservations, and even reservations that are being more recently debated surrounding socioeconomic characteristics, as well as many other characteristics. This report has taken the diversity discourse to a much broader level, and I will have Princey George, the lead author of the report, to talk more about it when she introduces. But I want to say that we have hopefully generated a debate, and I believe in the course of today's seminar, when we have a number of outstanding individuals who have made significant contributions, both academically, intellectually, and institutionally, in advancing the cause of diversity and inclusion, will further deliberate about these issues. I want to also take this moment to welcome two other distinguished guests and friends of O.P. Jindal Global University, Honorable Mr. Justice Michael Wilson, Judge of the Supreme Court of Hawaii, Honorable Ms. Justice Sabrina McKenna, Judge of the Supreme Court of Hawaii. Both of them, as you know, are no strangers to India. They have been here many times. They also serve as honorary adjunct professors at Jindal Global Law School. Yesterday, they spent the entire day at our campus in Sonipat, and now I am very pleased to report that yesterday they selected 5 of our students to join as judicial clerks, summer judicial clerks at the Supreme Court of Hawaii, and I'm very grateful to them for their leadership and support to our institution. Over nearly 20 of our students in the last 5 years have pursued the summer judicial clerkship program at the Supreme Court of Hawaii, and both Mike and Sabrina are at the vanguard of supporting this initiative. I believe this will be a transformative experience for our students who are going to be spending several weeks at the Supreme Court of Hawaii clerking with these judges. In fact, India and Jindal is the only country and the only non-American institution with whom a judicial clerkship program of this kind has been created, and I am grateful to the Supreme Court of Hawaii, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Hawaii, and all other judges, including the 2 judges who are present here, for taking this effort. There are 5 judges in the Supreme Court of Hawaii, and 2 of them happen to be here, and both of them are honorary adjunct professors of Jindal Global Law School. Thank you, Sabrina and Mike, for accepting our invitation, and Both of you, I know, have worked significantly in the fields of diversity and inclusion, and I'm grateful to you for your presence and indeed your contribution to the inaugural session. I also want to take this moment to welcome and thank my colleague, Professor Dr. Shiv Vishwanathan, Vice Dean and Professor at Jindal Global Law School of OP Jindal Global University, for his acceptance to deliver the keynote address. Shiv is clearly the most renowned and the most respected public intellectual of our country. We are very delighted that he is spending many important years of his life as an academic at our university. He has inspired generations of professors and students and scholars in India and around the world. And his very presence at our university and his contribution is a great tribute to, let's say, what we are trying to do at our university. I have elsewhere said that when somebody asked me once, how does OP Jindal Global University as a private university, protects academic freedom and autonomy and independence as a university? And I said, the fact that we have Shiv Vishwanathan in our faculty is a testament to the fact that the university is deeply committed to academic freedom and autonomy and independence. He's an unapologetic dissenter and has never hesitated to speak truth to power, and has spent his entire life addressing the most critical issues of our time without fear or favor, and in that process gained a significant amount of both reputation and indeed respect among scholars and students and others alike. I'm grateful to him for his acceptance to deliver the keynote address, which both Professor Chauhan and myself and all others are looking forward to. I also want to take this moment to thank my friend who's about to join us, Professor Stephen P. Marks from Harvard University, who will be commenting on the report later this morning. Steve has been another, sort of traveler in this distance. I discussed the idea of this university long before I knew the existence of Mr. Jindal to Steve. Steve and I taught a course in Hong Kong in the year 2005, and since then, Steve has been part of this journey. Steve is a member of the governing body of the university and also a special advisor to the Vice Chancellor, and he has constantly encouraged us and supported us in this endeavor, and I'm grateful to him for his presence today and indeed participation. I also want to thank my colleagues in IIHED, both Dr. Maushami as well as Nandita, and many others who have played a very significant role in both producing this report and indeed taking forward this conversation. I also want to recognize the presence of our registrar, Professor YSR Murthy, the director of JILDI, General Rajesh Kochar, and many other faculty members, including Mr. Aman Shah, the director of alumni relations, and others who are present here, Professor Asim Talukdar, head of the career services, for all of them to be joining us in this conversation. I know many of our deans also will be joining us in the course of today. So once again, thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much for your words, sir. We have now come to the most awaited part of the session, the launch of the report. May I request our chief guest, Professor Dr. Virender S. Chauhan, Chairman, National Assessment and Accreditation Council, to kindly launch the report on diversity and inclusion towards building a diverse, equitable, and global university. With the book. Thank you. I would now request Ms. Princey Marine George, Director, Office of Strategic Initiatives and Institutional Research, and Executive Director, Center for Global Higher Education Futures, to kindly give a brief introduction to the report.
Thank you, Nandita. Good morning, everyone, and we're so delighted that you could all join us today. I'm pleased to share with you a brief introduction to the report on diversity and inclusion towards building a diverse, equitable, and global university. This report is both an expression of a vision of guiding aspirations and a report of our accomplishments in promoting diversity and inclusion in the first decade since our founding. The need for building a diverse and inclusive university was implicated in our founding vision that emphasized both the imperatives of modeling ourselves on the best global universities and also our commitment to be part of a larger public service mission in India. From the very beginning, we understood that to build a university that aspires to meet global standards, diversification in all its multidimensionality has to acquire a preeminent role in all that we do at JGU. We also understood that exceptional universities across the world have consciously invested in building organizational practices and cultures that enable diversification of their institutional composition. It was evident that these universities have actively sought to bring about a satisfactory balance in the demographic composition of their student, teacher, and staff profiles that more or less reflect the composition of the societies they serve, and also in an increasingly globalizing world, the composition of contemporary workplaces. At the time of our founding in 2009, the imperative of diversity and inclusion was emerging as not simply a cultural and political aspiration, but also being widely recognized as an important source of creativity and innovation in professional, political, and social life. Our original vision was developed in appreciation of the dominant trends in the globalization process. These were fast-paced changes in the domains of technology, increased cross-national flows of economic and human resources, the rise of multinational workplaces, and a dramatic growth in India's domestic economy, and the implication of these developments for higher education institutions. For us at JGU, the intensification of global processes provided both the backdrop and the justification for creating an Indian university with an aspiration to excel at the global level. It also meant that to excel at a global level, we needed to model ourselves on best university practices that foster a culture of excellence, prepares participant students for not only career opportunities and in increasingly global workplaces, but also to actively participate in democratic processes in the societies they're located in. The aspiration to prepare our students to participate in global economic and cultural spaces acquired a special significance for us. As a consequence, we were compelled to ask, what does it mean to educate young persons in our time? What does the intensification of globalization mean in terms of our institutional and pedagogical processes? We recognize that if a university aspires to remain relevant in the changing socioeconomic scenario, it should be responsive to contemporary needs in economy and society. What this meant was that our graduates should be equipped intellectually and in spirit to participate in complex and uncertain economic and organizational contexts. Acknowledging this imperative led us to see that skillful coping in global workplaces places a premium on cultivation of respect for difference, a capacity to encounter novelty, and a disposition to embrace complexity, in addition to the development of analytical skills and the love of knowledge that have been traditionally emphasized in the curricula. Further, if experiences of difference, novelty, and otherness are commonplace occurrences in social and economic life, our educational processes serve their communities best if they find ways to replicate these experiences in the university. The university then acquired a new and transformative meaning in this context. It is no more exclusively an institution that transfers past knowledge to newer generations of students as the custodian of traditional knowledge, but a place where students acquire a particular form of experience that prepares them to face up to life in novelty and uncertainty. For us, the realization of the latter goal meant building an institution that provides a holistic experience, both inside and outside the classroom. We are witnessing a growing institutionalization of diversity and inclusion practices in business and economic organizations. We recognized at JGU that these developments will have consequential implications for how educational institutions function and what institutional and pedagogical processes get privileged. It was in this context that JGU's organizational orientation to actively seek out and promote a richer index of diversity acquired urgency in our overall vision and institutional practices. And it is in this context that this report acquires its meaning and significance. What do we mean when we use the terms diversity and inclusion? Diversity and inclusion are both multidimensional paradigms. They each have elements that can be measured and others that may be even more consequential and yet intangible. Diversity is desirable, enchanting, and attractive, but it's also very complex, sometimes expensive, and not easily translatable in practice. It's desirable because it's fair and just to mirror institutionally the correctives to various inequities in the larger society that the university serves. It's desirable because it's increasingly seen as the right way to constitute institutions in the contemporary world. It's desirable because it provides an opportunity to experiment at a micro level and demonstrate possibilities or potentialities for development of a fairer and just society within a shared socio-economic technological context. This demonstrative aspect, which is an integral part of JGU's vision to create a model higher education institution in India, is often underestimated but worth foregrounding. It's also desirable because a diversified university would more or less reflect the future workspaces of its graduates, thus providing a rich experience that will help them ease into early careers. It's also desirable because it could be a source of creativity and innovation. While the desirability is easily understood, its meaning is perhaps less easily grasped. This lack of clarity in terms of what it means and what it serves may often lead to a skewed emphasis on what is quantifiable at the expense of what is more meaningful. For example, we may tend to place greater emphasis on measurable attributes such as socioeconomic, demographic, and geographic indicators, while perhaps ignoring equally consequential achievements in pedagogical and cultural practices that contribute richly to the educational experience of our students. Against that background, I share with you some brief highlights from our report. The report captures diversity and inclusion across 5 key dimensions: demographic, which includes gender, age, faculty profiles, gendered leadership roles, gender identities, and sexual orientations; geographic, relating to regional, local, and international representation; spatial, relating to shared spaces and special needs; socioeconomic inclusion, and to what extent marginalized and disadvantaged segments of society have an opportunity to obtain the quality education offered by JGU; and equally important, pedagogical, which includes diversity of course offerings, range of options that are choice-based, diversity of pedagogical styles, composition of learning groups, and diversity of faculty educational backgrounds. And those are the 16 indicators that you see up on the screen that are highlighted in this report. We have been fortunate to make significant progress on some of these key dimensions, such as gender, diversified regional representation in both our student body and staff positions, faculty educational backgrounds, representation of women in academic leadership positions, choice of course offerings and pedagogical styles, and the range and diversity of our international collaborations and student and faculty exchange programs. So as we see, we have students from 16 countries and regions around the world currently enrolled at JGU. Out of our 432 faculty, 16% are international, and they come from 32 countries and regions around the world. And these span geographies across the world. This is a state-wise, state zone-wise distribution of students and faculty that we have highlighted in the report. And the one on the left represents the student spread, and the one on the right is the faculty. So as we see, with our students, 33.5%, which is the highest point on that graph, come from the north. And with the faculty, it is from the north and the east. When we come to gender, In our student body, 46% of our students are women. In our staff bodies, amongst the overall staff, around 60% are women. 40% are women, I'm sorry, and 50% of our faculty members are women. When we come to age, we have very young workforce. 37 is the average age amongst all staff, and 38 is the average age amongst our faculty. And international collaborations where we have focused much attention since our founding, or rather even before our founding in 2009. We have over 250 collaborations in 50 plus countries, and our collaborations span 10 different forms across all of these. They include student exchange collaborations, which now number 187, and faculty exchange and development programs, which now number around 180. One of the other measures we have taken is, as we focus on gender parity and leadership roles, there's been an increased focus over the years on having women occupy a large number of leadership roles, and this is reflected in these numbers, particularly among the faculty. 40% of our leadership roles are occupied by women, and 35% across the university of leadership roles are occupied by women. So we're aware that we are less successful in other dimensions, such as attracting students from marginalized communities in India, and also scaling up international student participation. We are conscious that increased participation of international students in our programs is crucial to our development as an institution of excellence at the global level. In that direction, we are making focused and institutionalized efforts, and we hope to progressively increase the participation of international students to 25% of overall student numbers by 2033. We're also actively seeking opportunities to secure resources that could help us reach out to marginalized groups and communities. Over the next 10 years, in alignment with our 2029 vision, JGU is committed to making prudential progress in harmony with our public service commitments. We look forward to gathering insights, ideas, and perspectives from today's discussions that we can take forward in our institutional activities. And I thank you all for taking the time to join us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Princey, for sharing the key points of the report with us. I would now request Professor Dr. Shiv Vishwanathan, Professor and Vice Dean, Jindal Global Law School, to kindly deliver the keynote address.
Good morning. I guess when I say good morning, I know it's a hypothesis. 9 o'clock is quite early for a lazy academic like me. But this morning I got up at 4 to wonder what to say to this group. And while lazily having my second cup of tea, I had this strange daydream. I felt Raj had come to visit me at 4:30. And by the way, that's a pretty frequent event for anyone who has been in the academe. He strikes early, 3:30 or 4:30, when he's at his peak and we are the most vulnerable. And he came armed with a copy of this manifesto, and he said, I want you to do something. It's almost like I do nothing. And then he said, I want you to do something which I generally don't approve of. He said, I want you to be playful. And he said, looked at this book and said, this book is only a statement. Can you turn it into a set of ethical startups? He said, forget IT. I want you to start a set of ethical startups on diversity. I want you to invent an imagination, because diversity adds to the imagination of democracy. He said, how will you do it? And I want you to do it as a scholar, not as a raving activist that you generally pretend to be. So I smiled. And then I liked the word ethical startups. It almost made me feel Gandhian. And I thought I'd begin with Gandhi. Because I think one of the things India has to do is to reinvent Gandhi for the new policy documents it's creating. And I could imagine Raj saying, we're not really a university till we do three things. See, diversity is about two things. One, sustaining the imagination. Two, adding to the imagination in a new way. And I imagine Raj getting up. I always have this feeling that one day he's going to land up in the Rajya Sabha making speeches, saying no school can survive as a school till it sustains one oral language, one craft, and one form of life. You see, that is the index of diversity. And he said, and I said, what are you talking about? And we had this imaginary conversation where Raj said, you know, the most stupid thing the government of India did was how it defined language. The government decided a language can be a language only when it has a script. That day we destroyed 2,000 oral languages. The destruction of diversity was intense. And then he referred to a document which many people may not know about, but I think it's one of the greatest contributions to diversity in the last few years, a civil society initiative, which took over Grierson's Linguistic Survey of India, and civil society produced a 50-volume document on the languages of India, headed by an old friend of mine, Ganesh Devi. The availability of languages was stunning. In fact, it reminded me of something Anant Murthy once told me. There's a paradox of the university, where an illiterate in India speaks 7 languages, and a convent school girl speaks only one, English. How do you bring internationalization and diversity together? I thought of a few examples. I spend my time mostly in science departments, so the examples come there. I remember a great botanist once telling me, you Indians don't realize the legacy that you have. And he said, ask me, how many varieties of rice do you think there are in the country? And I cautiously said, 50, 500. He said, 150,000 varieties of rice. The minute you have 150,000 varieties of rice, you're trustees of a heritage. And it's the first thing I realized. Diversity is trusteeship. It's trusteeship for the languages we have, for the cultures we have got, for the tribals we possess. It's a kind of responsibility. It's not a kind of brand advertisement that we have so many differences. It is a responsibility for those differences. So one of the first things I would expect this document to do one day is to save a dying language or a dying species. Our universities have to be responsible for the dead and dying knowledges of our society. Not out of any fear of irrelevance, not out of a sense of museumizing them, but by taking an active role in inventing languages. Diversity itself is a language. And in protecting this kind of language, we come to the second part, which I found fascinating. Raj always insists I go back to history. And I was looking at the history of the Indian university. And one of my favorite universities is Shantiniketan. Not the current Shantiniketan. Before the Shantiniketan was invented, the Scottish biologist Patrick Geddes and Rabindranath Tagore invented Shantiniketan as a post-Germanic university. And the most beautiful part of that university was Geddes began by arguing that no university is complete without a dissenting academy. In fact, all the history of the universities have been an encounter with dissent and dissenting academies. Not in terms of just politics, but in terms of ways of knowledge. And he said the real challenge for India is, how do we take different kinds of knowledge and absorb them? One of the most fantastic of this, in fact, is the dialogue of medicines. The dialogue of medicines was made possible by the dialogue of religions. And it's out of these two that we have invented one of the most dialogic forms of knowledge. How do different kinds of medicine, how do different kinds of the body coexist? How do you put them together in a conversation? Remember once I was asked in a botany class, how many uses does a coconut have? Guess. Because if you look at a standard botany book, they'll tell you oil, palm oil. But if you go down to Kerala, you'll find 225 uses for the coconut. That is diversity. That is an imagination. And he said, precisely this kind of an imagination we have to bring back to the university. Diversity needs dissent. And dissent needs a kind of creativity of a different kind. It's not just a question of we dissenting from the mainstream. We need the dissent, the diversity of minorities, margins, migrants. Because you have to remember in a deep and fundamental way, the margins in India are continental in size. They are imaginations we have to preserve. How did the university take over the trusteeship of the margins? How do we look at dissenting imaginations of ethnic groups? In fact, I remember a fascinating suggestion made by one of my colleagues when the Kashmir trouble was at its high point. That itself is an exaggeration. It's always at a high point. He said, can the university conduct summer schools in Kashmir? That is, we own up to a trusteeship of responsibility. We own up to a trusteeship of peace. And I think these are possibilities Jindal can easily bring to play. These are the kind of ethical startups that I'm trying to imagine. That is, we have the differences. Can we use the power of differences as a dynamo to start a new set of ethical worlds? Dream different things. Jindal is already, in a way, has a trusteeship of Chinese, Mandarin, and other languages. Can we add tribal languages? Can we sustain orality? Can we save at least 2 crafts and 3 oral languages from disappearing? I think that is the kind of responsibility we're talking about. It's not just, in fact, I remember a tremendous conversation during the Indian national movement when synthetic dye was being introduced for the first time. And P.C. Ray, the chemist, began by saying that synthetic dye is the great contribution of German chemists. And the geologist Anand Kumaraswamy laughed. And he said, the West doesn't understand red. The redness of red can never be understood in English. Because English is the language that marches in uniform. The redness of red in India is different because each caste, each village produces its own variety of red. That polysemy of redness is what diversity has to capture. It's a tremendous idea. Because we don't go by standardization. We go by a dream of diversity which multiplies possibilities, which invents the future. Because the commitment to diversity is a commitment to the rights of the future. The rights to alternatives in the future. The right to possibilities of a different kind. And I can imagine within a few years, when Jindal is already dreaming of a center for sustainability, we add a center for the future. The rights of the future become an important part of the democratic imagination. And it's in this context that I want to think of 2 people who made a tremendous contribution to diversity. In fact, the man's career itself is a tremendous example of diversity. Student of Heidegger, man who began with a PhD in chemistry, half Malayali, half Catalan, Raimundo Panikkar. And Panikkar had a brilliant defense of what he meant by diversity. He said diversity is a pilgrimage. It's a pilgrimage across religions, across cultures, where you traverse differences in order to discover yourself. This discovery of the self needs differences, is what the experiment in diversity is about. Can we experiment in this way? I mean, just think of a simple possibility which many people think are impossible. throw the borders open between India and Pakistan, a whole generation of partition victims will be grateful to you. Instead of enacting the idiotic scenes at the Wagah border, let's just open the border, 15 days at a time. Watch the change coming over India and Pakistan. You dream of possibilities, and let's not be afraid of new possibilities. Diversity is not a behavioral exercise. In many ways, it has to begin as a misbehavioral exercise. You have to challenge the present and the conditions of the present. In fact, this morning when I was suddenly sleepy, I was reading through this old document version of this, and all the sort of rankings and indices felt like boring temperature readings. And I said suddenly, what if I turn it into a semiotic? Diversity is not a set of properties. It's a set of relationships. It's a set of inventions. It's a dream of new possibilities. So my next book will have Jindal as an index of a dream of possibilities. Jindal dreaming the rights of the future. Jindal actually saving 3 languages, 4 dying colors. You know, I was just spending some time with Yalappa, who died recently, one of the last great weavers of indigo. Stunning. In fact, he had made an indigo kurta, and I must confess, for the first time, I actually felt like stealing a dress. The color was beautiful. And the question that diversity raises is the question of memory. How do you remember these people? How do you sustain memory? In fact, as a scientist friend of mine put it, diversity is the fold between an ethics of memory and an ethics of innovation. You don't destroy, you don't eliminate, you don't celebrate disappearances. You try to bring the dreams of these memories into a different universe. That's plurality. And in fact, in this context, Jindal, as one of the most distinguished law faculties, should now propose a tacit constitution to the President of India. A tacit constitution which brings culture back into the constitution, which brings civilization back to the constitution. Let me give you an idea. We create a new social contract between the oral, the textual, and the digital. The oral is a stunning part of our civilization. How do we sustain orality? The orality of craft, the orality of music. No Indian musician has a score. He doesn't put it down on print, he remembers. The raga is a mnemonic. When you see a Western musician perform by score, you almost think the music is textual. No Indian singer will ever use a score. The raga is an oral mnemonic. And the way you improvise there gives you a different idea of the musicality of our times. How do we create these kinds of memory? And I think these are some of the issues we need to face today. To do this, Raimunda Panikar once suggested that India rework itself as a civilization. In fact, in his Gifford lectures, he proposed one of the things the university could do. He said, the danger of India is if it becomes a society in linear time. He said, can we invent chirological time? A time where past, present, and future exist simultaneously. A time which is multiple. Because when you have multiple time, you know that the tribal is not outdated. You know that the nomad is no longer irrelevant. How do you create time which gives dignity to our cultures? I think we need a tacit constitution. I'm tired of lawyers praising the Indian constitution. It's illiterate on culture. It's illiterate on civilizations. And I think it's time we build a tacit constitution. In fact, this idea was first developed in a science laboratory, where we said, unless we map the different kinds of time, of cosmology and cyclicality, you can't have human rights. You can't save the rights of the tribal in linear time. I remember an anthropologist friend of mine read the Brundtland report, and I thought he'd be impressed. He said, what an illiterate document. I said, what's up? Don't tell me the English is bad. He said, no, this document on sustainability is written in linear time. Shifting cultivation has 21 different kinds of time. Does Brundtland understand the multiplicity of our universe? Sustainability and diversity go together. And to separate sustainability from diversity is one of the great illiteracies of the modern United Nations. We have to challenge it. We have to do it as a critique which is constructive. And I think in a deep and fundamental way, Raj is a subversive character. He lets others be subversive on his behalf. And I hope this document turns to be subversive enough so we capture the imagination of democracy in terms of a new dream of languages, in terms of a new dream of an India which sustains tribal societies without evicting them. One of the greatest dangers of social science and law today is the gulag mentality. The Supreme Court has no problem, or High Court, has no problem evicting 2 million tribals. But that gulag imagination has to be challenged through a theory of diversity. And I think Jindal, whether it likes it or not, you can blame it on Raj, has elected itself for that result. Thank you.
Thank you for such an invigorating address, sir.